It's strange how the most powerful moments in life rarely arrive with a warning. They don't come wrapped in grand speeches or planned events. They sneak in quietly, almost disguised as something ordinary. They catch you off guard. A fleeting second, a few simple words, and yet they etch themselves so deeply into you that you know they'll never leave. That night was one of those moments. The kind you think will be nothing more than background noise in the story of your life. Just another night, just another ordinary routine, no different from the countless others that came before it. But life has a way of slipping meaning into the cracks of the mundane. It hides the lesson in plain sight, waiting for the exact moment when you're relaxed enough to hear it and unguarded enough to feel it. And when it arrives, you don't realize at first that something monumental has just happened, until the words replay in your mind over and over, like an echo you can't silence. The room felt still, not in a way that was uncomfortable, but in a way that made every detail sharper. The sound in the background faded, though it hadn't stopped. The air felt a little heavier, though nothing had changed. And then, there it was, a voice, clear and unshaken, breaking through the haze of routine and piercing straight to the center of what matters. It wasn't the kind of thing that asks politely for your attention. It demands it, not with volume, but with truth. The kind of truth that forces your heart to stop for a second. The kind that makes you forget where you are and what you were doing, because suddenly none of that matters anymore. In an instant, it was like a spotlight had turned inward. Every choice, every habit, every unnoticed detail of life lined up for inspection, and there was no avoiding it. The world outside blurred, but inside, everything sharpened. The words weren't dressed up, weren't softened, weren't stretched to make them sound profound. They were just there, simple, raw, and heavier than they had any right to be. It's funny how simplicity can carry more weight than complexity ever could. You can spend hours listening to advice, reading, searching for answers, yet still miss the truth that can be carried in a single sentence. It doesn't arrive in the form of a polished lecture or a carefully crafted argument. It just slips into the air, unassuming, but capable of shaking you to your core. And that's exactly what happened. That night, something shifted. It wasn't a slow change. It was immediate. Like someone had pulled back a curtain you didn't even know was there. And once you've seen what's behind it, you can't unsee it. Maybe that's the thing about the moments that truly change us. They don't need preparation. They don't need time to build. They can come while you're sitting still, doing nothing extraordinary, thinking you're just passing the time. And then, without warning, the ordinary cracks open and the extraordinary spills out. Long after the sound faded, the words stayed. They had a way of echoing not just in the mind, but in the heart. A kind of echo that doesn't get weaker with time. It gets louder. Because once truth has been spoken in a way that you can feel, it becomes impossible to go back to the person you were before you heard it. That night became one of those bookmarks in the story of life. A before and after, the kind of moment you don't need to write down because you already know you'll never forget it. The details will fade, what was playing, what the weather was like, what time it was, but the feeling will never fade. The stillness, the clarity, the undeniable certainty that something inside you had just changed. And maybe that's the real lesson. We never know when life will decide to hand us a truth we weren't ready for but desperately needed. We never know when a seemingly ordinary moment will become the turning point we didn't see coming. And when it happens, there's no going back. There's a certain power in innocence. Not the kind that is fragile or naive, but the kind that sees the world without the heavy layers that life piles onto us over time. Innocence isn't blind, it's unclouded. It doesn't twist meaning to fit comfort, and it doesn't dilute truth to avoid discomfort. It simply speaks what it sees, exactly as it is. When words come from a place untouched by cynicism, they carry a purity that can't be faked. They don't sound like they're trying to impress or persuade, they simply are. And that's what makes them so disarming. You can build walls against criticism, shield yourself from opinions, and turn away from advice. But innocence slips past every barrier without resistance. It reaches you before you even realize you've let it in. That night, it wasn't a speech, it wasn't even a long sentence, it was just a truth, delivered without hesitation, without second-guessing, without the fear that usually chains our words. And maybe that's why it struck so hard, because somewhere along the way, most of us have forgotten how to speak that way, without filtering ourselves, without hiding the raw edges of what we mean. The shock wasn't in the content alone, it was in the delivery. There was no attempt to soften the impact, no careful pacing to prepare for the weight of the message. It was dropped into the air like a stone into still water, and the ripples began instantly. No matter how I tried to return to the moment before those words were spoken, I couldn't. The surface had been disturbed. We often underestimate the voices we think are too young or too inexperienced to carry wisdom. But wisdom doesn't check birth certificates. It doesn't ask for years of experience before it reveals itself. It flows from moments of clarity, and clarity can come to anyone, at any age. That's what makes it so powerful and so unpredictable. The irony is that those who speak from innocence rarely realize the weight of what they've said. They don't measure it by its impact, they measure it by its truth. And maybe that's the secret. They aren't aiming to change you, which is exactly why they do. That night, the words landed with a strange mix of softness and force. Soft in tone, but forceful in meaning. The kind of force that doesn't shove, it just plants itself so firmly inside you that you can't shake it loose. And once it's there, it grows, whether you want it to or not. It made me think about how many truths I might have ignored in the past simply because of who they came from. How many moments I dismissed because the messenger didn't fit my idea of someone who should be listened to. That night shattered that illusion. Because when truth is pure, it doesn't need credentials, it only needs a voice. And perhaps that's why it felt so jarring. I wasn't ready for it, I wasn't expecting it. And yet, once it had been spoken, I realized I had needed to hear it more than I could. Have ever imagined that some moments in life hold up a mirror we can't look away from? Not the kind of mirror that flatters or distorts, the kind that shows everything exactly as it is. It doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care about the stories you've told yourself to make peace with certain choices. It reflects reality, and it reflects you. That night, those words were that mirror, and when the reflection appeared, there was no hiding from it. It was raw. It was honest. It was uncomfortable in the way only truth can be. It didn't accuse, but it revealed. And revelation is often harder to face than accusation because you can argue with someone's opinion, but you can't argue with what you see in your own reflection. We go through life with layers. Layers of justification, distraction, and busyness. They protect us from having to face the deeper questions. They make it easy to look away when something feels too close to the bone. But sometimes life rips those layers away in an instant, and you're left staring at yourself without the filters. That night, that's exactly what happened. Innocent words can do that. Cut through the fog of everything you've been pretending not to notice. They don't give you time to prepare. They don't give you the luxury of retreat. They just land, and you're left to deal with what they've uncovered. The mirror those words held up didn't just show actions, it showed patterns. It showed how much I had been letting pass by without attention. It showed the habits I'd convinced myself were harmless. The time I'd convinced myself was endless, and the people I'd assumed would always be there. In a flash, it made me see how fragile and fleeting all of it really was. The strange thing about truth is that it doesn't care if you're ready for it. It doesn't wait until you've reached a safe place to deliver its message. It comes when it wants, and it leaves you with no choice but to face it. That night, I faced it. I saw things I couldn't unsee. And while it was uncomfortable, it was also necessary, because sometimes discomfort is the only doorway to change. The reflection didn't just expose mistakes. It exposed possibilities. It made me realize how much I could change, how much I could choose differently. If I stopped pretending I didn't see what was in front of me, it wasn't about shame, it was about awakening. And awakenings are rarely gentle. That's the paradox of these moments. They can break you and build you at the same time. They strip away the illusions you've been clinging to, and in the empty space that's left, they offer you a clearer view of who you could be. But to step into that possibility, you first have to face the reflection without looking away. That night I didn't look away. Some words are so short, so unadorned, that you'd think they would fade the moment they're spoken. Yet they don't. They stay. They grow. They echo in places you didn't even know were listening. And the more you try to push them aside, the louder they become. That night, the words were simple. Almost too simple. They weren't poetic. They weren't wrapped in clever phrases. They didn't sound like something from a book or a speech or a movie. They were just there, direct, honest, without decoration. And that's exactly why they carried such weight. We often think that power comes from complexity, that a message needs depth, length, and sophistication to matter. But the truth is, the heaviest words are often the lightest in structure. They don't overwhelm you with size, they pierce you with precision. They know exactly where to land, and they land there without hesitation. These words didn't just enter my mind, they bypassed it entirely and went straight to the core. No processing, no overthinking, no mental defense. They arrived, and the heart understood them before the mind could even form a response. That's the kind of impact they had. And it made me realize something. It's not the length of the message that matters, but the truth inside it. People can talk for hours and leave you unchanged. But one sentence, if it's the right one, can alter the course of how you think, how you live, and how you see the world. That night, the sentence was like a seed, small enough to fit into a single breath, but carrying the potential to grow into something life-changing. Seeds don't shout. They don't force themselves into existence. They rest quietly until the right conditions bring them to life. And over time, that's exactly what happened. The meaning began to root itself deeper and deeper. The simplicity also made it impossible to forget. There was nothing complicated to misremember, no elaborate structure to break apart. It was clear, and it stayed clear. It was like a note struck on a piano that just kept resonating long after the key had been pressed. That's the thing about pure truth. It doesn't need to be dressed up. It doesn't need to prove itself with eloquence. It stands on its own. It lingers not because of how it's said, but because of what it reveals. And once revealed, it can't be buried again. Those words, as simple as they were, carried more than their sound. They carried history, unspoken moments, unnoticed habits, unasked questions. They condensed them all into a form that could be spoken in seconds, but understood over a lifetime. And that's the paradox. The lighter the words, the heavier their meaning can be. There's a moment after the shock fades and the echo begins to settle, when understanding starts to take shape. At first, it's blurry, like trying to read through fog. You can feel the importance, but you can't fully grasp it yet. And then, slowly, the outlines sharpen. The picture becomes clear. That night, clarity came not as a rush, but as a quiet, steady awakening. It wasn't about the words alone, it was about what they pulled into the light. They didn't just reveal a single truth, they unraveled a thread that led to many others. Each one connected to the next, each one showing me something I hadn't wanted to see, or perhaps had never noticed at all. The realization hit hardest. When I understood this, I had been moving through life without truly listening, not just to others, but to the moments themselves. I had been hearing but not listening, watching but not seeing, surrounded by moments of meaning, yet missing them because I was too caught up in the noise of everything else. We tell ourselves that wisdom must be earned through years, through experience, through hardship, that it belongs only to those who have lived long enough to understand life. But that night shattered that belief. I realized wisdom doesn't measure the years you've lived. It measures the truth you can see. And truth can be seen by anyone who looks without the filter of ego or fear. That was the gift those words carried. They were unfiltered. They didn't come from a place of judgment, but from a place of observation. They saw what I couldn't, or maybe what I refused to, and once they showed me, I couldn't unsee it. That's when the shift began. Not because I wanted it to, but because it was impossible to go back to the way things were before. The realization was both heavy and freeing. Heavy because it made me face the ways I had been wasting what truly mattered. Freeing because it showed me I didn't have to keep living that way. It was as if a door had been opened, and beyond it was a version of life I had forgotten was possible. One where connection wasn't. An afterthought, where attention wasn't divided into scraps, where the moments that mattered were given the space to matter fully. It's humbling, even unsettling, to know that someone you thought you were. Teaching can be the one to teach you the most important lesson of all, but maybe that's the beauty of it. Maybe the people we expect to shape are also here to shape us, not with grand gestures, but with moments so simple they almost slip past unnoticed. Almost. That night, I didn't let it slip past. Change doesn't always begin with action. Sometimes it begins with a single thought that refuses to leave. It doesn't ask for your attention, it demands it. It sits in the back of your mind, quiet but unshakable, until you start seeing the world differently without even meaning to. That night, the shift wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. The moment those words took root, they began working in places I didn't even know needed change. Every thought, every choice, every interaction started to feel different, as though a new filter had been placed over my vision. The same routines I had been moving through without thinking suddenly felt heavy with meaning. The people I saw every day, the moments I used to rush past, the little details I thought were too small to matter, they all began to stand out. It was as if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for me to notice. The shift was not just about understanding the truth, it was about feeling it. Feeling it in a way that didn't allow for the old patterns to keep running on autopilot. That's the thing about true change. It doesn't just sit in your mind like information, it lives in your body like a new instinct. I started noticing what I had been blind to before, how easily time slips away when you're not paying attention. How quickly people can drift from your life when you assume they'll always be there. Or how much we give to distractions while telling ourselves we're too busy for what matters. This wasn't guilt, it wasn't shame, it was awakening. And awakenings are powerful because they can't be undone. Once you've seen with clarity, the blurry version of life no longer satisfies. Once you've tasted presence, distraction feels hollow. I didn't need to make a grand vow or declare a new way of living. The change was already happening, inside, quietly, like a seed breaking open beneath the soil. And with every passing moment, it grew stronger. It's strange, isn't it? How a single sentence, spoken without force, can move things inside you that you didn't even know were stuck. How it can realign your priorities without a single demand being made. That's the kind of shift that doesn't need permission, it just happens. That night, the shift was complete, not because my life was instantly transformed, but because I knew it would never go back to what it was before. And sometimes that's all change really is. A point of no return. Some moments leave quickly, fading into the background before you even realize they've passed. But then there are moments that anchor themselves so deeply inside you that they become part of your very wiring. They don't just live in your memory, they shape the way you see, think, and act for the rest of your life. That night was one of those anchors. A simple exchange, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. It didn't just make me pause. It made me permanently aware. Every time I drift too far from what matters, every time I start to lose myself in noise and routine, those words come back. And when they do, it's as if they're pulling me back to the surface, reminding me to breathe again. The lesson wasn't complicated. In fact, its power came from how uncomplicated it was. It was a reminder that life isn't measured by the big dramatic events we wait for, but by the small, consistent moments we often overlook. That meaning is rarely found in the grand gesture. It's found in the quiet presence we give to the people and experiences right in front of us. It taught me that time is the most fragile thing we hold and the most deceptive. We treat it as though it's endless, yet it slips through our fingers without us even noticing. We tell ourselves there will always be more days, more chances, more conversations, until one day there aren't. And so, the lesson etched itself into my mind. Pay attention now, not tomorrow, not when things settle down, now, because now is all we ever really have. The words spoken that night became more than just a memory. They became a compass, a guide that doesn't tell me exactly where to go, but makes sure I'm always facing in the right direction. No matter what distractions or demands pull at my attention, that compass remains. It points me back to what matters. It's rare for a single moment to have that kind of staying power. But when it does, you realize it's not luck. It's because that moment held the truth you were meant to hear all along. And once truth finds its way into you, it doesn't let go. That night taught me that wisdom doesn't need a stage, and lessons don't need a teacher's desk. They can come quietly, in the middle of an ordinary evening, when you least expect them, and if you're willing to hear them, they will follow you for the rest of your life.